So the Romanian language is, believe it or not, a Romance language. It's I've heard it said that it's the hardest Romance language to learn. I think grammar-wise, yes, but if you're thinking pronunciation, French is going to be the worst. But Romanian, its word base is kind of interesting. It's like 77% derived straight from Latin. So like it's the closest living language to Latin, quote unquote, because they keep so many of the words and the grammar structure of it. But the other portion of the language is going to draw from ancient Slavic words, and then a little bit of Hungarian, and then the original Dacian language. Romania was called Dacia. If you look on the Bible map in the Book of Mormon, or not the Book of Mormon, in the Bible map, there's a country called Dacia on one of those maps, and that's Romania. And so that's kind of the origin of the language. They used to write with the Cyrillic alphabet like hundreds of years ago, and then they went through a French kind of, not Renaissance, like they wanted to mimic a little bit of French culture, and a lot of people were learning French, and so a lot of their Slavic influences kind of passed away, and in came this huge influx of French influenced Latin into the language. And so you'll see, if you know a word in English that has its root in French, I guarantee it's going to be almost exactly the same in Romanian. Like one of the words for foundation, okay, foundation, fundație, like it's almost exactly the same, just change a couple things here and there. And so if you're wondering how to say something and you don't know a word, you can always guess and try and go with like a fancy French word. If it ends with shun in English, usually it's like etsi or etsiune. So as far as like learning words, you're going to have both an easy and a hard time. The pronunciation, everything is exactly phonetic. I know a lot of languages say that, like in Spanish, they say it's precisely phonetic, but it's not. You have a silent H and a couple letters that mimic the sound of each other. Romanian is, every single sound is always pronounced. There's nothing that isn't. The only exception is when you pluralize things, and it has an I at the end, you just, instead of saying E, it goes like a, or like it. There's just different pronunciation on that, but it's still pronounced, so everything is precisely phonetic. It's a case language. It's one of the easier case languages. What a case language means is that a word will change its form depending on its part of, or its function in speech. And so you've got like 6 or 7 cases and then a couple moods and voices. What that basically means is like there's a difference between saying he loves her and then he gave a package to her. So like you have one there that's accusative and then the other would be dative, like direct and indirect. Those are your cases. And then you have a couple things that you're gonna run into, like genitive and voices. There's interesting things like passive, there's supine mood. So the grammar, there's plenty of grammar to learn. If you understand your own grammar first, like if you know English grammar fairly well and you know how to use it correctly, learning the grammar of the language shouldn't be too difficult. But a couple features that make it unique as opposed to a lot of other Romance languages, like Italian, it doesn't pluralize with an S, it pluralizes by changing the vowel at the end or by adding a vowel. Except Romanian's got a lot more ways of doing it. It has an additional gender for words, and it's a lot more irregular. And so, like, you have masculine, which usually masculine always pluralizes with an I. Feminine, usually there's some kind of E added to it, or sometimes it adds an I, or sometimes you add this little thing called ur at the end of it. As far as the way they use language, it's a lot different. They use a lot of, I guess you'd say, salutations in English. So in English, if somebody says, oh, I have 3 kids, you say, okay, that's nice. In Romanian, there's a phrase you say after that, like it's să vă trăiască. If you say, oh, such and such just passed away, in English you say, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. In Romanian, it translates like, may the Lord forgive them, or something like that. And like there are phrases you say depending on like when somebody tells you something. And so in a way, it's a lot more formal. You address people as your lordship, or kind of like a more formal way of saying ma'am. And it's just a lot formal. You might feel like when you first learn it, there's a lot less ability to express yourself, but you'll see there's a beauty in the language where you have ways to respond to things that you can't in English. There are key phrases you say after you hear things. And so that's kind of an interesting component of the language.